day so far, huh? Everyone here, everyone who's ever existed, we all have a personal timeline. Those unforgettable and seemingly sometimes innocuous moments that when we look back over our life, we can see that it was formative in who we have become. I have a lot of those because I'm a baby dinosaur. But for me, when I look over my life, and of course, we've heard some stories about that today, they're not all trauma with a big T. There are many times that we have moments that impress upon us in ways that we have no idea what shifts will occur as a result. Well, I had one of those the year I turned 28. After more than half my life being sad and scared and dark and depressed and really wanting to check out, quite honestly, I took my first personal development class, and it changed my life in a weekend. Okay, well, it wasn't really changing my life in a weekend. It was 2 weekends. Okay, that isn't really true either. And now I realize that I tell people that it changed my life in a weekend, but really what happened is it shifted me and it put me on a path that would ultimately change my life. Not in that weekend. But it did feel like that at the time. And I realize now that what happened was, oh gosh, I have to tell this story. It's so funny. So I went to this class, and at the end of it, the leader said, hey, if there's anybody in here that feels like they didn't get it, raise your hand because we want to make sure that you leave with what you came here to get. So I boldly stood up, and I had met a bunch of people, and there were about 350 people in the room in this New York City conference space. And the people, my friends, were like, sit down, what are you doing? I said, no, I want to get what I came for. I paid my money. So thankfully, they started on the other side of the room. Thank you, universe. And the first person stood up and started sharing, and I sat down because I got that. That made sense. And then the next person stood up and started sharing, and I stood up. I need support. I need to discuss this. So now my friends are like, sit down. Like, no. And so I kept doing that. I would stand up and sit down and stand up and sit down. After about 5 of those, I had one of those like aha moments, and I sat down with, it kind of felt like a thud because I got it. And this is what I got. We cannot sit down and stand up at the same time. Okay? But that was an analogy because I realized that I couldn't be happy and sad at the same time. Like, you got to choose. And I think for me, at that point in my life, this tendency, we'll call it generously, to be depressed and sad and dark had become a habit. And I didn't realize that I was at choice. I had become, not voluntarily, but in some form, I had become a victim to this behavior, right? It was sort of like when you cross the lawn and you create that rut in the grass, right? It's well-worn because you always go that way after school. Well, until I went a different way, I could not rewire my brain to have a different outcome. It kind of reminds me, this literally was life-changing for me. I know it may sound wacky, but it literally put me on a new path that I've been on for a while, okay? It changed everything for me. It was the beginning of a new iteration of who I be. So it reminds me of this whole thing. I don't know if you know about Jack Canfield. He's a mentor of mine, and I love him. He is the guy that created Chicken Soup for the Soul. And he also went on to create a book and a lot of training and things in the personal development world. And he has a book called The Success Principles, which I work with a lot with my people. And one of the formulas in there is E plus R equals O. I don't know if you've heard this, but it's event plus response equals the outcome. Now, there are a lot of events that we have in our life that we can't change. And certainly when you're little, you pretty much feel like you can't change anything. You're at the mercy of all these sorts of events. So living in a toxic home, or going to a school where you're bullied, or being unappreciated by whoever doesn't value you. And we generate that has some sort of meaning, right? But we don't ever look at what is our response, the R part of that would then create a new outcome. And that part we do get to own. We do take responsibility for. We can either react, which is what I had been doing, or I could consciously respond and generate a new habit, behavior, whatever. And I didn't connect on any of this when I was younger. Now it seems so obvious. So that's the first piece. Like, wow, we can respond to events so that we can choose the outcome. And what's cool about it is you can do it with something new or something old. It still applies. We just look at and manage our memories differently. So that reminds me, because many of us, we didn't have the luxury of growing up in a home like Sarah Blakely, who's the founder of Spanx. And she will often share, I don't know if you know this about her, that in her family, at the end of the week, her dad would ask, what did you guys fail at this week? What did you try and fail at? And they were rewarded and high-fived and celebrated for failing. Wasn't like that in my house. In my house, it was all about not being enough and what you could have done better and where you blah, blah, blah. So no wonder we have so many mixed messages. And it wasn't like my parents were actively trying to diminish me. They sure did a heck of a job. It's just what happens when we take this input and we then feed it into this commentary that we already have about ourselves. And until we can shift that, it's hard to shift anything else. It wasn't until I was much older that I realized when my parents would go on that tirade, I would know that I was on the right track because they were so disapproving. I was no longer looking for their approval. I started to tap into what was important to me. And I realize now that we live in a society that is all about external validation. When we're little, we're rewarding. Oh, look, Susie's crawling. Isn't that sweet? Yay, Susie. Right? Oh, look, Mikey stood up. Yay, Mikey knows how to stand up. Right? Oh, look, Davy took a poo. Really? I don't know about you, but no one has celebrated me for pooing in a very long time. But thank you. Can you come to my room later? Anyway. But the thing is, like, we live in this weird society where we're cheering. Look, we give trophies now to kindergartners for nothing. However, when we're about like 9, 10, that all goes away. Suddenly, we're supposed to be validating ourselves. And it's really hard to do that because we weren't taught that. We were taught to rely on this external piece. And it's so messed up. But we now have this opportunity to take it all back, to take ownership, to take not only responsibility, but to have this joy of following our own path and living our own dreams and being who we know ourselves to truly be able to be. Like, you know that you have greatness in you, even if no one else can see it. You know it. You know you're a leader. You wouldn't be here. You wouldn't listen to this stuff. You wouldn't try to better yourself. Whether you're leading your dog across the street, a family, a company, we are all leaders, but we are told something else. And remember, we get to choose what to believe. I recently heard an interview of Bruce Springsteen, and I thought it was so interesting because he said that when he was little, he felt invisible. Well, that was my best wish, because if I wasn't getting verbally abused, I would rather be invisible. But it's painful. And he said he used his music to fight through that. And I think about how many celebrities use their music, use their writing, literally found their voice through their music. Well, we have to do the same thing too, right? I'm inviting you to do so, to use your voice, to use whatever your music is, to rise up and be the best you know how to be. Because we are here on a mission to lift humanity, to make the world a better place, and to live our best life. Like, I have a great life. You can have a great life. And by living that way, by making those choices, we are paving the way for others to do the same. We're modeling something completely different that I think some of the previous generations didn't have conscious access to, right? Things like energy and quantum physics and all the things that were so woo-woo have now been proven to be science. Imagine that. So we have an opportunity here, and it's a beautiful one. So the other piece that I picked up on, I encourage you to look into, is that Dr. Marty Seligman, who's considered the godfather of positive psychology, he came up with, read his book Flourish if you dare, but he came up with some very interesting information around psychology and being positive and happy. And what we've come to learn is that happiness is actually a skill. That not only are we not all born with it, but sometimes it is, I'm not going to, saying beaten out of us is a little strong. However, we have evidence in our lives that makes us think that it's not possible for us, but we forget that it's a skill. We forget that we can learn it and we can practice it. And I've been practicing it for decades now, and it's worth it. So I will leave you with this. This is my nod to Ted Lasso. This is Ted Lasso-ish. My quote. Life is filled with challenges. It's a little bit like riding a horse. If it doesn't feel uncomfortable, it's very possible that you're doing it wrong. Thank you.